So, this morning, I'm going to kick off with the question time panel, transformative justice. As I outlined in my opening address, there's three forms of justice: restorative, retributive, and transformative. As you'll know, the government has thrown a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money at restorative justice. There's so many compensation schemes I've lost count, and that will, of course, run its course. When it comes to retributive, in other words, holding those, if any, to account, and punishment, obviously, we'll have to leave that alone for today. That is in the hands of the CPS and also the outcome of the public inquiry. When it comes to transformative, I don't believe, up until now, there's been a serious discussion on what can be put in place so that nothing like this ever happens again. And so the purpose of today is to touch a little bit on restorative, but more importantly, going forward, how we can apply transformative justice to the post office network so that we can all have a viable future and have confidence in our businesses and, you know, even going past 2030. So, let's have a serious debate. I will come to you as the discussion ensues. Stick your hand up clearly. Wendy's got a roving mic. Stand up, identify yourselves, which region, ask your question, and that's it. Right, thanks everyone. It's a bit unusual, I've got to hold the mic. Right. So we're going to kick off with everyone just introducing themselves. So
I'm Charlotte, I'm the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Post Office, 2 years into this role, and very much part of a new exec leadership team that are very focused on transformation. So really looking forward to discussion with you all today. My if I compartmentalise my day job, I sponsor Pillar 5 of our transformation plan, which is resetting stakeholder relationships. But day to day, what that means is my team are running our communication channels with our colleagues and with all of you. It means that we have an ongoing dialogue and relationship with our government shareholder. I've got a couple of representatives in the front row with us today. Some of the interaction that we have with our trade unions, we handle a lot of media inquiries on a daily basis, as you might imagine. Some of that speaks to the topics I think we're set out to cover this morning, but a lot of it is about our commercial plans and the products that we run. A lot of it is trying to promote the work that you all do. So anyway, I mean, that's probably enough on what my role is, but my team look after the relationship with NFSP, and we spend a lot of time with Calum and with many of you and through our other forums, and that's an increasing part of the role, something I'm very passionate about, building and learning how we involve you in our decision-making even better and even further going forward.
Thank you. David.
Lovely to be here. I'm David Enright. I'm a partner with Howe Co solicitors. I think one or two of you will have come across us over the last many years. My firm became involved with Postmasters in 2009 when the brother of the manager of our accounts department was arrested for fraud and theft. This was a man we had known for years. And we simply couldn't believe it. It couldn't be right. And as a result of that, we became involved in the original complaints and mediation scheme all the way back in sort of 2013-14. We represented most of the postmasters who went through that failed scheme. It was an opportunity. If it had been seized at the time, the Horizon scandal would be something in the past rather than something in the present. It wasn't. And we've continued representing postmasters for the past 12, 13 years, including through Sir Win Williams' Horizon inquiry, in which we represent 70% of postmasters, and we represent postmasters across the UK in relation to compensation. But we've also had the privilege of working with Jim Simon of the Restorative Justice Council, who you're going to hear from shortly. And we've travelled to all 4 nations of the United Kingdom, meeting postmasters where they live to hear about their experiences. So this is something I've been doing for a very long time. I have personal reasons for being involved in it. And I know very well how important all of you are. Jim.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm Jim Simon. I'm Chief Executive for Restorative Justice Council. We're a charitable organisation that operates on a national scale, and our role is to ensure that wherever restorative justice is used, it's done ethically, it's done with people, and our role with Horizon and Post Office has been around developing a restorative justice programme with postmasters who have been harmed and their children and their families to make sure that we create a meaningful programme that will deliver people's needs. It's been a very long year. It was May last year that we were first approached, but we've spent the first year just talking to postmasters about what this programme needs to look like, what they need to get out of it, and also working with Post Office and other partners to make sure that they can deliver on what's being asked, and are now in a position where we're starting to move into delivering some of those restorative justice meetings. So it's been a journey, but a very positive one, and I'm really pleased to be here today to talk a bit more about that.
Right, thank you everyone. Right, we're going to kick off with a question from Jim McCafferty. I can't actually see, but yes, he's there. Right, stand up please.
Yeah, good morning conference, good morning panel. Jim McCafferty from the Northern Ireland region. So the first question is, with volume 2 of the Horizon Scandal inquiry due to be published soon, can postmasters expect the same level of commitment to implementing its recommendations as we saw with the policies and the contracts following Justice Fraser's Common Issues judgment?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, very, very good question. Charlotte, would you like to?
I mean, absolutely. We, as all of you, will be waiting for the future volumes. I think there's 5 more that we can expect over the coming months. And we implemented all of the recommendations from Volume 1. We've done a lot of work to anticipate with our advisors and with our inquiry team, and having absorbed all the evidence sessions in front of us, so what we think some of the recommendations will be. So we've actually implemented, we've done a big piece of work which we called the root cause analysis. Obviously it won't be perfect and there's more to learn from Sir Owen himself, but we've implemented a lot of that analysis into our annual business plan this year. We've got 22 priorities in there that are already actively working on things that needed to change that we know will come out. And then of course we will, as you will, absorb any further recommendations and act to build that into our planning as well.
Thanks, Charlotte. Calum, has there been, a positive impact, in your opinion, of those recommendations and the way they've been implemented? Has it led to a positive impact on the network and postmasters?
I think so. In relation to the kind of question, obviously looking at the Horizon inquiry, if I go back to 2019 and sort of what Lord Justice Fraser announced in March 2019, I remember Nilesh Joshi and myself. Nilesh was the chair of the NFSP at the time, and we tried to sit down with the Post Office to ensure that a lot of the recommendations from there were actually implemented. It was tough. It was difficult. The maximum sort of the Post Office were willing to do at that time was the minimum that they had to, and that was a difficult thing. And a lot of the implementations took years to sort of come in. In fairness to Charlotte and sort of the current management team, I'd say they've sort of been a lot quicker at actually implementing the recommendations that have come forward. So that's a credit to them in comparison to those of the past. I would still sort of say that that there is still a little bit of a reticence, I would say, in relation to some sort of aspects of it, and I certainly know sort of through the contract changes that were sort of being or refresh, I should say, that was being implemented, we still sort of felt a little bit of a reticence for some things to be sort of changed around training, because we sort of feel that postmasters need to be properly supported as far as training is concerned. And of course that aspect of you then having to train your staff. If you've not been trained properly, how can you train your staff properly? So, you know, we do feel that there's one or two things around there. We feel that there's one or two things around the contract in relation to holding people to account that we still haven't got quite right, but we're getting sort of there sort of with it. Long way to go, and I think there's more sort of kind of to be done, but I think sort of in fairness to the current management, they're a lot more quicker at implementing sort of decisions. So when gives these volumes, I've got more confidence that they'll come in quicker.
I mean, just to pick up on that, I mean, training's absolutely critical in terms of for you in the network. It's also a huge amount of the transformation that we're trying to do for colleagues to bring in new skills. Some of that's restorative justice. There's a training module related to the past, but I mean, just to echo what Calum says, training's very much a focus of our forward planning.
Right, thank you to you both. David, you've obviously been involved in quite a number of public inquiries, and obviously there's reports, recommendations, verdicts. Just how difficult is it for organisations, you know, to implement recommendations from a public inquiry? I mean, do they?
Well, Tim, I think behind Tim McCafferty's question, you may notice that Tim and I have a slightly similar accent, Jim, is that it's about culture change. And there is a worry that when the inquiry publishes its second report, that the focus will shift off Post Office. And I think a theme of the discussion we're going to have today will be about culture change. We have Ed Baird from the Department of Business and Trade here today and other officials. Government policy, and by government policy I mean parties of all stripe, it is their policy that we must maintain and enhance our high streets in communities because it goes to community cohesion. And what is the linchpin to any successful high street? It is the post office and it is the postmaster who runs it. What we need to see is a culture change, I feel, from the post office, and we'll talk about how difficult it is to maintain culture change, to rather than what can we do to you, or what are we going to do to you, to what can we do for you. And I think that government, Ed, have a big role to play in that, in directing post office, because it aligns with government policy, to truly demonstrate to postmasters that they are the only valuable resource that the post office have, and to champion them and to change the relationship from a what can I do to you to a what can I do for you relationship.
Thanks, David. Jim, have you got any comments on what's been said so far in your experience in your current role?
Yeah, so just picking up on David's point, I would actually go one step further than what can we do for you. I come from a restorative world, and restorative works because we do it with people. So there's a risk if you do too, then you're enforcing things. If you do things for people, actually you're not helping them to develop as a community. So with would be where we're aiming for, that it's a culture change that is done with people, not to them or for them. It was our starting point when we looked at the restorative justice programme. So the initial remit was, can you design a restorative justice programme? And the honest answer to that is yes, I can. I could do that in the next couple of days. But there's no point in doing that because if people aren't invested in it, if people haven't been part of the discussions, then why would they want to take part in it? So that first year around the listening sessions was working with people. What does this need to look like? Doesn't mean we did everything that everyone suggested, but we took elements of everyone we heard to and created the program that we're moving forward now. And I think that's what needs to translate into culture change. So there's got to be elements, but it's got to be done with people to bring them along, to bring the community back together. Restorative works because it's relational and we're all equal in that relationship. We all have different responsibilities that we have to manage, but ultimately we're there as one collective.
Thanks, Jim. Calum, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, and I think sort of if we just follow on sort of or kind of delve a wee bit deeper sort of into Jim's question, sort of it was okay. Well, once or when he's given his recommendations, what happens? Of course, the big thing is we don't know what his recommendations are going to be, so we're going to have to wait for those, and then we're going to have to actually go through them to sort of actually understand what the expectation is. And then we're going to have to prioritise, aren't we? We're going to have to sort of okay, we can do this now, but we can't do all of those sort of at once. We don't have the resources, so we're going to have to sort of prioritise actually which ones we do and when and how. And that's really the important thing. And I think sort of as Jim sort of said, which is absolutely, it's got to be done with you. The reality sort of is, and I think it's really sort of important that we sort of we're clear that sort of the current management sort of structure had nothing to do with the past. Okay, they had nothing to do with the past. However, they still are part of the organisation that caused the harm to so many people over such a long period of time. And that's a difficult thing sort of for them. So what we've got to sort of be able to sort of do is change the relationship so that the master-servant relationship that has existed for so long changes, and we're actually into one sort of partnership, so that you as the postmasters, you as the owners, 100% of the post office network is now owned by you. It's your investment sort of that keeps this business go. Now there is an aspect, and we might come on to it, but I'll set this up now. There is an aspect of without you, there is no post office. Without post office, there is no you. We sell the products and through our post office that generates the revenue, but post office is the one that negotiates to sort of to enable us to actually have the products to be able to sell in the first place. So it's very much a symbiotic relationship. So it has to be us. It can't be them and us. It can't be sort of top down. It has to be the collective, and that's what we've been talking about sort of over the last couple of days. So, to restore, sort of actually, first of all, we've got to recognise that people were harmed. We've got to bring them back to sort of where they were, but then we've got to transform the relationship to make sure sort of that it can't happen again. And if the relationship of the past is still the same today, i.e. master-servant, then it's possible sort of that the people who were harmed could get harmed sort of again, because they're not taking into account actually how their decisions impact sort of on you. We've got to sort of we've got to change it, and we've got to sort of have a relationship that is a partnership of equals, and that's really sort of what we're after. It's not a superiority thing. It's not about taking over. It's about sort of working together with. Okay. But we have to wait until Sir Wynne has provided these recommendations, and then work through them. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Calum. Just going back to Jim's question, postmasters expecting a level of commitment to implement the recommendations. Whose responsibility is it to implement those recommendations? David?
There is a sort of a controversy around discussion around this. We have public inquiries very regularly into major incidents, and it is often the case that the recommendations of public inquiries are not implemented. And you will see, for example, within the National Health Service, have been inquiry after inquiry over decades that routinely make the same findings that are never implemented. So then 5 years later, you have another public inquiry and then another one, all recommending. And there are some of us who have been argued for a centre for public inquiries attached to a particular, maybe to the Cabinet Office, that will monitor the implementation of inquiry recommendations. In this instance, it is the responsibility, I think, it lies largely with you. to ensure that the recommendations are implemented if they are in your interests, and reminding yourself of the power that you have collectively to insist on implementation. So that would be my initial answer, Jim.
Jim, have you got anything to add?
No, very much agree with what David said, and I think one of the most frustrating things, and I've seen it with lots of reports where it's the same recommendations over and over and over again, and we then spend more money to look into something and again make the same recommendations. I think where I'm quite hopeful here is that we have seen action on that first report, and I would hope that will continue moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Picking up on David's point, when he said it's our responsibility to ensure, I think really it does lie at the door of the Federation and also the Post Office. So, Charlotte, what could the Post Office do from now until? And I mean, I think it's going to be very much later in the year. What could the Post Office put in place so that there's a process for when those recommendations comes out?
Yeah, and I had to go at describing the work we've done. So we have got a process around it, anticipating what we think the big areas are. There are 22 priorities under sort of six headings. It's jointly owned by us as an executive team. We've committed to, we're calling it our legacy plan, and of course we will need to update it once we've heard from Sewin. It's embedded in our annual business plan, which obviously we share with Calum, and he interrogates and helps us prioritise around those big strategic themes. So it's already baked in to process, and when we have the outcome of the next 5 volumes, we will keep that updated to make sure we've got all the nuance in it. But it's already in process.
Thank you, Charlotte. And Calum, just to finish off before I open it to the floor, what can the Federation do from now until the end of the year? What could we put in place?
Yeah, I think David's also wanting to come in sort of a comment sort of as well, so just to make sure we get sort of his view. I think sort of, one of the things that sort of concerns me sort of is that there's a lot of things that the Post Office are setting up that's actually all sits under the board, sits under the senior leadership. And one of the sort of aspects of, particularly sort of in relation to the Horizon Inquiry and the recommendations, we need to sort of actually have something separate so that there's actually something sitting outside that, yes, the executive sort of are involved in. I think DBT need to be involved in that, and I think sort of the NFSP as your representatives need to be sort of involved in that. I think it's to sit sort of outside in one sense, rather than sort of under the authority and the autonomy sort of the board of the Post Office, because we do have to remember sort of actually, irrespective of the fact that none of the people sort of who are currently here were involved in sort of in the past, it was still the organisation that sort of caused the harm. So we have to sort of make sure that it's not being dictated to, shall we say, sort of by the board of the Post Office under sort of their remit, sort of their authority, etc. We have to sort of take it out, separate it, sort of actually, so there's an independence there, and actually to check and make sure that the recommendations are actually being done in the way that they need to be done. And of course that enables your voice to actually come into those. The problem sort of at this moment in time is everything is actually under the auspice of the Post Office, under the control of the Post Office. So therefore actually it limits our ability to necessarily sort of make sure that sort of what you want is actually sort of driving sort of the direction, because if it's not what the Post Office board want to do, or if it's not what the senior executive of the Post Office want to do, then it ain't going to happen. So that's really what we need to do, and we need to, that's certainly what we're pushing for. And if you look at everything that sort of we've been saying over the last couple of years, far greater independence, far greater independence, far greater independence. External sort of scrutiny sort of on that basis, so to bring your voice in, so that as both David and Jim sort of said, rather than sort of actually have done to you, you're actually able to ensure that what you want, what you need is actually shaped into what's going to happen sort of going forward. So I think that's what we need to be sort of doing, is ensuring that actually that forum is there and present for you.
I just build on that quickly? I know you're going to go to Dave as well. Just to clarify, obviously the board is overseeing the reforms that I was describing, but we haven't plucked them out of the air. They are based on the inquiry, and the independence of the recommendations will come from the inquiry. You know, we've done our best to anticipate those core themes, and we will absolutely not be dictating to ourselves what the right things to do are. We will be led by the inquiry, which is a huge, independent, thorough, rigorous piece of work. So just to reassure you, it will be very much led by Sir Wyn through that independent lens.
Thank you, Charlotte and David.
Yeah, well, I want to give you two examples of unsuccessful and successful implementation. A few years ago, we had the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, and it ran for 5 years. It cost £200 million. It made 20 recommendations to enhance the safety of children across the United Kingdom. Those recommendations were made on the 22nd of October 2022. They weren't implemented under both Conservative and Labour governments. You will have heard all the furore in the publicity around grooming gangs that has been going on, and the government has now set up a new public inquiry, a statutory public inquiry, which will cost a great deal of money to investigate grooming gangs. If the government had implemented recommendation number 1 of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, we wouldn't need a grooming gangs inquiry because the problem would already have been solved. So that's a negative example that costs the public money and fails to deliver. On a positive, we did the Grenfell Tower public inquiry, an appalling tragedy, and they made recommendations about changing the cladding of buildings to make them more safe, because you may remember that they clad the Grenfell Tower in a hugely flammable material which, killed 72 people. But the recommendation that came out of that inquiry was that we needed to change cladding particularly around public buildings and residential buildings. And that was implemented, rapidly, and it's going on all over the country. So there's an example of a public inquiry that made a recommendation that was not followed through with it, which is now causing further cost and harm, and a public inquiry where a recommendation was taken on board and is being implemented. So that's the way we need to approach it.
Right, thanks, David. Does anybody from the floor have any comments and questions about any of what's been discussed so far? Wendy's got a mic. There's a gentleman. Oh, David's got a mic.
Thank you, David. Good morning. My name is Shishir Masharani. I'm from Post Office in Cleethorpes. My question is for Charlotte. In industry, general industry, if there is an incident of some sort, and there is, say, for example, prosecution by the Health and Safety Executive, in the interim, a company will undertake a RCA. Just as you said, you've undertaken an RCA. And the recommendations would be implemented, just as you say you've implemented some. Would you, in the interest of openness and trust, share that RCA report with us through the NFSP and the 22 recommendations that you mentioned?
Yeah, I certainly will. As I said, it's baked into a bigger plan that also incorporates all the commercial transformation that we're doing, which Calum's been privy to and which we've taken many times through our consultative council where Calum sits. But yes, in terms of that slice that's about what we anticipate coming from the inquiry, absolutely we'll do that.
Thank you, Charlotte. We've got Howard at the back.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning, conference. Good morning to the panel. I welcome the assurances and the commitment, of course, given to the resolution of the Horizon, the whole of the Horizon ugliness that we've seen, the scandal. But one query I do have is that of an issue that's been raised by the DBT, and that is the apparent dilatory nature there is on the part of Post Office to issue the disclosure documents. Now, I'm referring particularly here to the HSSA, the appeal scheme that's currently running, which of course Howe Co and Schofield Sweeney and other companies are heavily involved in. But I'm told it's kind of reached a bit of a kind of stymied at the moment because of the disclosure documents that DBT require have not been released by Post Office. I'd be interested to know exactly what the situation is there, and if that is in fact the case, when will they be released? Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Charlotte?
Do you know, I don't have the detail that you want. I will follow up. I know others, unless any of my colleagues in the room are closer to that than I. Let me follow up with you afterwards.
So can I ask that a few minutes with this?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Just following on from Howard, Jim, you know, how important is it really for this industry? And I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody. You know, postmasters out there, what I see, we really do need to move on with our lives, and it's not a case of sweeping what's happened away. It's a case of getting on and, you know, all the restorative justice programs and things getting brought to a close. Just how important is the speed? Because I seem to remember in Sir Wynn's first sort of report, he said that, you know, it was as if we can't really particularly do anything about the you know, compensation schemes, because if we started altering things, the victims would come to more harm than what it would to carry on. So what can be done to speed things up, and just how important is it for, you know, full disclosure from where it's needed?
Thank you. That's a good question, and we are very much separated from redress, and there is a reason for that. So I wouldn't want to comment on redress schemes because I don't have the knowledge or background to do that. But what I can say, and one of the comments that you made was about further harm, and that's central to everything that we do in a restorative way. Nothing that happens should be adding to the harm that's already been caused. That's why with the work we're doing around restorative justice, it is all about open, honest, transparent communication, and if questions can't be answered, then that isn't the right time to pursue that. So Wynne did have a sense of urgency, and there does need to be that, but not at the risk of causing further harm to people. So there is a temptation to react very quickly to lots of things, particularly around recommendations, because we need to be seen to do something. We certainly had that with the restorative justice recommendation. You know, I want to know what you've done by the 31st of October. Well, the reality is, if we'd have rushed to get meetings done in that time, they wouldn't have been safe or useful. They would have been harmful to both postmasters, but also the organisations, and actually would break trust. So there is that fine balance of doing things urgently, but doing them mindful that we don't want to cause further harm. And the way to do that is around open and honest, transparent communication. And we've seen that from Charlotte just then. I'm not going to comment on something that I don't have information about, but I'll go away and find it. That's the honesty. What we need, what we then need, is the action that follows that.
Thank you, Jim. Calum, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think Civic is important. I mean, obviously, David will know more, and you might want to comment on this. Not that I'm trying to lead you in any way, shape, or form, but obviously, on the 6th of January, there was the Bay Select Committee sort of held a session in Parliament, and David and his colleagues were very much present and sort of made comment on that. One of the things I would sort of say is, you know, we're in 26 now. 2019 sort of was when the GLO, you know, was handed down. So we're 7 years on from that, and there's still sort of people out there who haven't received their compensation. There's still people out there who just don't know what's going on. You know, they're sitting in limbo land. They've put in their historical shortfall claim, and they've heard nothing, don't know what's going on, and we're constantly sort of being asked about that. So we're aware sort of a number of colleagues, certainly if their claim is in relation to prior to 2005, where the Post Office really just doesn't have sort of any evidence. It just there's literally no evidence to say one way or the other, sort of whether there was actually a shortage that took place. Well, you know, we've got to go sort of on the balance of probability. If so many of us actually sort of had losses over such a long period of time, if the Post Office cannot find any evidence, the balance of probabilities is that they actually did suffer losses just in exactly the same way as the rest of us did. So on that basis, if they put their claim in, then so they can actually, you know, whatever blockages there are in place that is preventing the Post Office sort of paying out, then they need to be removed. And fair play to the Post Office, and I think this is important. Simon Recalden, who's the previous you know, director sort of responsible for that, was pushing for that, and that was a couple of years ago. So why is that not being resolved? And I think whether that's DBT, whether that's Post Office, I'm not really interested. Again, I'm not sort of trying to point finger to blames. All I want is sort of is the blockages removed so that people can actually get the compensation that they so deserve.
Thanks, Calum. I think we'll just move on. We've already touched on culture change. So can I ask Deval to stand up, please, and ask his question?
Good morning. Why has the culture within the post office still not changed when it comes to how the postmasters are treated? Thank you.
Well, Charlotte.
Well, I think everyone has a different experience of culture. So first thing I want to say is if any of you individually want to raise how the culture of Post Office and your relationship with Post Office is feeling to you, if it's negative or you think there are ways we can improve it, just let myself or any of my colleagues know, because I think culture is individually felt. But that said, it's something collectively that we are very much trying to change. It's something that we have been given as one of our 5 priority objectives by DBT to focus on. We've set a target culture and we've put a lot of provision in place to move towards that target culture. It takes time. I mean, obviously, I only have 2 years of experience, and from the organisation I joined to what it is today, I feel there's been culture change, but that doesn't say, Deval, that if your experience is different to that, that's not legitimate. So I think things have changed, but we have a long way to go to create the sort of true collegiate, partnership, supportive, efficient, effective, you know, there are many, many aspects to it. I'll just describe for those that haven't, I think we have communicated this, but whether you've not read it, our culture, our target culture for 2030 is to create a customer-focused post office that prides itself on its agility, inclusivity, and impact. So, you know, we can unpack that, and maybe there's a separate session that which should spend on what that means, because I know that's just a sentence, but there are a lot of programs in place to change the way we operate, to train people in what the different culture that we want is and looks like. We've got a lot of leadership support in place so that we can role model it in leaders, so that we can hold our colleagues to account if they're not displaying the right cultural behaviours. So, you know, we are going after this, and it's not something that we're very restless about it. So I feel we are on a journey and with a very clear path to change it. I'll just give one example, because there are so many different ways that we want to change the culture, but one that sits in my remit is about bringing more postmaster voice into the organisation, you know, which is still, as Calum said out, it's still governed by a board, it's still owned by DBT, that's the sort of governance structure that we work within, but we've brought a lot more postmaster voices through different forums and channels, and many of you in the room, I mean, I've seen lots of the members of our council, of our panel, and of our adopter function during the last day, and I know many of you are in the room, so perhaps if you wouldn't mind, just pop your hand up if you sit on the council, the panel, or are involved in one of our adopter function forums. So look, don't take it from me. You know, I just have the responsibility to set up the forums and administer them and help to create, useful agendas, but talk to any of the people that are involved to find out, do they feel culture's changing, what more we can do. Because we've only spent a year with some of those arrangements, less than a year, so we're still testing and learning. DBT did a very helpful review, and I know the Minister will probably talk about it later. You know, there's lots we can learn, there's lots of progress we can still put in place, but we're very committed to it. So look, let's use the time we have together at events like this to discuss what more needs to happen. So we've got another, I don't know, half an hour, so I'm here to listen about what more we need to do.
Thanks, Charlotte. David.
Yeah, I could talk about this all day long. Well, let's start with the post office. In your post office, there's a place where you put the soft drinks, there's a place where you have the tree-bore mints, there's a place where you have the cards, etc. And there's a way you do things in your post office, and you've done it for years. And it can be very hard to shift that, because if you move the tree-bore mints or the soft drinks over there, or serve things in a different way, then one of your staff goes, "Oh, that's not the way we do it," and starts moving it all back again when you go away. When you writ that large, with Charlotte and Nick and other post office officials who are here, lovely people I've worked with, you know, good intentions and good want to think, but they're individual people. And the culture of an organisation, it actually goes into the DNA of an organisation, and it's extremely hard to shift it. It's extremely, just like in your post office, it's very hard to have a revamp. Let's just do things differently. You can't just say those words. And what an organisation needs to do is it needs to very clearly define the culture that it wants to achieve. It has to really work it out. What is the culture we're trying to achieve? And then it has to engage, in this instance, with postmasters. It can't be top down. We're going to change the culture to this, and this is how we're going to do it. No, no, no. You have to go and do the process that Jim has been doing and speak to people and say, look, this is the culture we've been thinking of. Have you got any ideas to bring to the table? And you make a collective decision together about what the culture that will suit all of us should be. So, you know, so it has to be collaborative, and people have to be fully engaged. Then leaders within your own post office, but within post office itself, they need to show, not tell. They don't think, we are changing the culture and this is what no, no, no. You need to do it, and you need to demonstrate to people that you are doing it, and doing it consistently. Then you need to develop kind of like new rituals almost within an organisation to begin changing the DNA, like having a Monday morning meeting with your staff to say, well, this week we're going to achieve, this is the goal we set, how are we working towards that goal, are we doing it, have we found problems in changing our business culture in our local post office, and keep revisiting it, and then having data and feedback from people to say, well, we're at our 6-monthly checkpoint in our culture change activity. Well, these are the things we had hoped to achieve, but how we achieved them. Do you think we've achieved them? And so it's quite a process, and you can see it in your own post office. You can see why it will be even harder within post office itself with its 400-year history. But I think it's vital that there's a culture change, because plainly the facts speak for themselves. The culture is not working. The culture that we currently have is not working. And there's a very big job of work for Charlotte and Nick and Mr. Brocklehurst and others to make a decision. You know, Nigel Railton, as chairman, he needs to make a decision. Do we or don't we want to have a culture change where it's, you know, what can we do for you type relationship, and then to engage with you to make that a reality.
Thanks, David. Calum, from a culture's perspective, if you remember, we had Darren Burns from Timson Group came 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. You know, I invited him for this very reason, that the culture in Timpson's is one of, I think it's called upside down management. Yeah. You know, what kind of culture would be preferable, in your opinion, on behalf of postmasters? And could that be achieved with the current structure of government shareholder, Post Office Board, senior management, and then postmasters? Or does it need a complete shake-up or something different?
I think it needs a complete shake-up and something different, yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think sort of actually we've got to, there's a couple of things that I need to sort of say here actually, which I think are important. So there's a couple of points I'm going to make. The first thing sort of we've got to remember, sort of the Post Office is not an independent organisation. It is owned by government. So, you know, you've not just got the culture within Post Office, you've got the culture sort of within government and DBT as well. And you know, we've got to sort of understand, so that actually this problem didn't exist. This problem didn't happen purely because of the Post Office. There was other sort of aspects, and I would certainly sort of say sort of within previous iterations sort of DBT, sort of where the problem lay. Their oversight simply just wasn't good enough. It just didn't exist. I remember sort of the very first meeting sort of I went to. It was the Association of Convenience Stores rural shop report that they were announcing in Portcullis House. And I remember going sort of along to that meeting, and there was a government minister came along, and he stood up and he sort of gave sort of a speech, and part of sort of his speech was verbatim, word for word, that I had heard from Paula Venables previously in the week sort of in her office. And it struck me sort of then that you've got a situation sort of where actually what ministers, etc., are talking about is exactly sort of what the Post Office sort of tell them. So if the Post Office tells government ministers that everything in the garden is rosy, then that's what sort of they believe that the case is. So they've actually got to speak to the people who are actually tending to the garden. That's the sort of really sort of important thing, and that's you that are actually working in. And if they're not prepared to listen to you, the postmaster, as to sort of what your reality is, they're not getting both sides of the story, so they can't necessarily make an informed decision. So we've got to change sort of culture in a few places, really, to be honest. But there's also your culture as well. So, you know, we cannot sort of ignore sort of actually that we're part of this relationship. And if our culture sort of isn't right, then we've got to sort of do that as well. We've got to sort of be able to establish and decide sort of what kind of culture it is that we want, and then ensure sort of that that's brought into it. So the second point sort of I think is really important sort of is that we can't have a situation sort of where the Post Office are determining what the culture is going to be, and then sort of actually through sort of various forums actually get postmasters together and say, this is what we're going to do. That's the wrong way around. It has to be sort of something, it has to be something different. That's why sort of the NFSP are pushing for 25% ownership of this business, because that's the way sort of that it's actually done. Because if we bring you sort of into sort of a position sort of where you have an ownership say in the business, then actually it stops things happening to you, because you have to be considered. You cannot be ignored. Decisions cannot be done. You know, we've decided this is what's happening and you'll do. Because as postmasters, as self-employed investors in this business, you have to be part of the decision-making sort of process. And that's not the case sort of at this moment in time. That's not how I feel it is at this moment in time. And I think that's fundamentally the question. I listen to what you have to sort of say, and you are so frustrated. You love this business, and you want this business to thrive. You want it to be a success. You want it to move forward because you've got an intrinsic interest in it, because you've invested in it. But you're still telling me, actually, that things are happening to you. They're not happening with you. And I think that's what we fundamentally need to change.
Charlotte.
Yeah, just pick up quickly on the ownership question, which, you know, we as a leadership team, I mean, it wouldn't be our decision. We're very open to where debates and decisions on our future ownership takes us. What we're very focused on as a team now is the transformation plan that gets us to a viable position as a business with you that is sustainable, that's, you know, commercial, and that can have those options. So we are trying to create optionality. So absolutely, you know, keep debating that. Let's keep thinking about it. But I think there's a more you know, we've got those 2 to 5 years left of our transformation plan, I think, before any big decisions will
But I think that's why it's
happen.
important that,
So
that it has to come in now.
Yeah. So,
no, but it needs to happen now.
So it is happening.
Because, no. What I mean is the ownership. So the ownership side now. We're not talking about full ownership. We're talking about a share in it. That has to happen now, because actually the reality sort of is that it might be that sort of actually 2030, by the time we sort of come there, that's not what this group of people want. That's the bit. Sort of, whereas if there is an ownership say in it, then actually they've got to be listened to. It can't, and certainly that's how it feels. That's how it feels to us at this moment in time. Is the board is in charge. The board will decide. They'll tell you what's actually going to happen. We've decided, we've set our annual plan, this is what's happening, and if you're not happy about it, tough, it's happening. And when we think of proximity and how that sort of happened, and these people sort of are really sort of upset about that, but the Post Office completely ignored it. I mean, for me to be sitting in a meeting sort of with senior executives of the Post Office, and for me to sort of say, I've listened to the 400 postmasters have come to me and said they disagree with proximity, and for senior individuals in the Post Office to completely dismiss that, I have never been as angry in a meeting as I was that day. I had to take a step back to control myself so that I didn't say or do anything that was in an unprofessional manner. But for senior individuals to dismiss postmasters in that manner, that's what we're talking about. So when we're talking about culture, if you've got board members dismissing sort of the view of sort of postmasters, there's your problem straight away, because they're the ones that are setting the culture, and if they're dismissing these people, it's just words. That's all it is. It's just words. So we've got to have sort of an own.
Look.
Touched a nerve there.
Thank you, Calum, and I hear you. In the board meetings I sit in, I don't sit for the full board meetings. The postmaster views, those that you're applauding, are loud and clear. They are heard. They are absolutely listened to. I would just look. So keep pushing for ownership quicker. That will be for a DBT decision. Yeah. All I can share is my own experience. I've been in a employee-owned mutual business for 10 years, and there's a lot of research and evidence around that model, of which I'm a big fan of. It's not great for huge transformational commercial change and challenge. So I'm not sure, from my personal experience, it would be right for the next few years where we have a huge commercial pressure to together get over and get you into the place that your business is. That's my experience. It's a slower type of model. I think we need pace. We've got a competitive marketplace like never before. I think we need to grit that together, work our way through it. It's got to be quick. It's got to have a governance structure that does listen to the postmaster views. They're always there in the boardroom, but can act quickly. That's just my view and the experience I've had. Not that it's the wrong model in a medium-term sense.
Thank you both. David?
Yeah, I did want to add to that. You see, it's quite difficult for Charlotte and her colleagues who are here. We've just seen from what Calum said about the proximity proposal, something postmasters are just not happy with, and they feel that they're fundamentally not being listened to. And it is important. I was speaking to Jim McCafferty earlier about how it's directly impacting a postmistress in his area in Northern Ireland. Charlie, earlier on you asked people to put their hand up if they're on the council, and a number of people did, which shows the enthusiasm for involvement. But those people are incredibly busy running businesses, whereas post office executives like yourself are employed 9 to 5 to work on this stuff. The people we've heard from are working sort of 7 till 8 on their business, and then on top of that, having to find time to become involved in the council, become involved in that. So there is a job of work to be done here about listening, and it's not easy, but it can be done. We can see it in the John Lewis model, we can see it in the cooperative model. There are other models out there who do make it work and who do engage with their members. So you're here taking the fire, and I know you know it's not pleasant.
I worked at John Lewis for 10 years, and I'm one of the biggest advocates.
Yeah.
However, it didn't suit them when their market got much more intensely competitive, as yours has. It didn't suit them. It was a model that slowed them down, and they suffered. I'm a big fan of the model. I'm just saying we have, and proximity is one symptom of this competitive pressure that we're all facing. And that, you know, while we listen, and yes, you're working many more hours than we do, but you're working in your individual branch. And the, you know, where we have to work together is that we're taking decisions against this competitive pressure for the benefit of the entire network. So we're thinking about the 11,500 branches with every decision we make. And when we engage with you, we're hearing about your individual experience, which of course is what you're spending 12 hours a day on, and it matters. But the sum of the parts, it's not an equal, that there's not a homogenous experience that each of you has, in which case it would be easy. We could just make that right decision, you know. So some of the tension comes from that.
Very briefly, when you use the word we, you see, that should be the we. It shouldn't be.
But this we is not homogenous, and the views from the network are not the same. If I sat down with each of you individually, you would not all have the same solutions to offer me. You wouldn't, because we do that all the time. You do not have a single collective view.
They have an
different
organisation.
types of branch, different regions, you know. So
they have an organisation,
the
National Federation, through which they channel their views. And what Calum was saying, which got such a reaction, was that they did go out to the members. They did get their views. They did channel them through to the head of the post office, and they were dismissed out of hand.
Okay. Listen, okay. So final thing, and then do open, look, we've got many sessions through the day with some of my colleagues, and I know we should keep exploring something like this. But if we were to make the wrong decision from the competitive landscape on behalf of the entire network, you'd be the first people to tell us in 2 years' time, why didn't you act quicker to stop Royal Mail, to stop Collect Plus, to stop PayPoint moving into our area and taking our business? You would be the first people to say, why didn't you do more to stop that? And I know the proximity change is difficult, but it's intended to stop that competition coming and taking your customer base. Okay.
Right, thank you. Right, we just need to, I think we're venturing into, you know, proximity, and I think that's a discussion for Neil and, you know, the question panel afterwards. So let's just get back to culture, please. So has anybody got, you know, any experience, you know, in their experience, you know, say in the last 2 years, do you think the culture's improved, or do you think it's worse? What do you think? If you stand up and speak, please.
Good morning, everybody. I become a postmaster since 2019. I want to understand about, like we were talking about culture. I believe, you know, that in this organization there is few stakeholders. Government, top leadership, which hired by government, postmasters on the grassroots level, and the federation. So my understanding is, obviously, the government don't hire anybody, top leadership, not to thrive post office. They want you to bring on board to make it work. Yeah. And then, obviously, post office employees comes for operational needs. So it's just simple equation. I would like to understand whether the government, what mandate you get from government. I know you are here for 2 years, but obviously when you've been hired, you've been given the, you know, the roadmap and you know, what would like to achieve, or what would like to, you know, the chairman and top leadership wants to get from you. So there is a roadmap. There is this, the job role. So is the job role is to make post office successful, or penalize postmaster? You know, that we need to, obviously, postmaster works on the grassroots level, hard 12-hour shift, maybe even more with the retail side. So what we achieving? What's the culture? What is your, you know, the aim, goals, objective to make this business successful, or to implement your ideas, or ignoring postmasters, or basically what will be the outcome? You are there because of the post office.
Yeah.
Management is there for the post office. Federation is there because of the post office. We are here because of the post office. So I don't understand, obviously there's talking about federation. Federation role is to cohesion between, the link between top leadership and us, yeah? We are one basically, but I don't think so. Since 2019, I see, that everybody's pulling each other's legs.
Yeah.
Right. Can I
question?
Right. I think I could sum up what you're trying to say.
The question is about culture. What you gonna bring the changes? The current leadership. The question is another question. Sorry about that. We are opening click and collect. Post office just came up with that. Yeah. Why they came up? Because the other people are like you just said. Why the pay zone is coming to our area. You can't stop any other organization. Your job is to make things change, to make, bring changes which attracts customers, so customer walks into the post office rather than going to left, right, center. You cannot stop any organization to come into the business.
So no, I'm just, two things that everybody you're asking what our jobs are, what have we been asked to do, what we've been tasked to do. Everybody that works at post office has two, and there are many more because everyone has individual job roles, two things that everybody is driving towards, everybody is tasked to do in their year, and that we are judged against and assessed against at the end of the year. One, are you driving remuneration? Two, are you changing the culture? That is what everybody is focused on, and that's different to when I arrived. We didn't talk, we meet weekly as a set of colleagues that work for post office. Every week we look at remuneration, and that is what we're tracking. That wasn't the case before. Everything we're doing to improve efficiency, to change the technology, to drive our costs down. We've taken 40% of our own cost base out this last year to put more money into remuneration. It's at the highest share of our revenue that it's ever been. I know you need more because I know the costs on the high street are going up and up, but that is what everybody at post office is focused on, driving up your remuneration and changing the culture.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Sort of question for Calum. Still sticking to a culture, and we'll wrap this up soon and move on to another topic. What have you seen, Calum? From a cultural change to Post Office Ltd, is that attributed to the leadership team? Have you seen any effectiveness whatsoever from, say, the Consultative Council and Postmaster Panel and Adopter Function? Do you see those having a positive impact on the network, or?
Actually, we had a meeting just last month, and the chair of the Postmaster Panel said a very, very important thing. We have no authority. And my response to that was a simple question: are we nothing more than a talking shop? And I think what I'm hearing from colleagues who are involved across these various other things is a level of frustration. That they've gone into it with good intentions. They're good, honest, decent people who want to help this business change and for its culture to change. They are hearing the words of the post office and they are taking it on board, and they're going, right, okay, if you want to change, we're here to help you change. But there is a significant level of frustration that they're being siloed, that information flow is just not there. And they're really just kind of feeling as if they're banging their head against a brick wall. I think, if we look at the Postmaster Panel, I think it's the right thing. I don't think it was set up right, but we can change it, and we can improve it, and we can make it right. The adopter function, well, as you know, that was NFSP's idea. It's disappointing, actually, that the fact that rather than the Post Office working with the NFSP, on that, they've actually taken it on themselves, and they're doing that actually separate from the NFSP. That's disappointing. If we take operational excellence, again, that was NFSP's idea, but it was taken out of the NFSP, and again, under the control of the Post Office. And that's the frustrating thing. There are things there that if we get it right, the culture will come from that, and postmasters will feel as if not only are they being heard, but they're actually able to sort of influence and actually change, help this organising change in the way that it needs to change for the good sort of us as as partners sort of in the business. But that's the fundamental sort of thing. We've got to change that relationship, and if that relationship hasn't changed, if the structure of that relationship hasn't changed, i.e. that your investment is recognised in some form so that you are recognised as partners in this business, then sort of everything flows from there. But if that fundamental aspect hasn't changed, i.e. there is still this master-servant sort of relationship, then the culture hasn't changed. And that's the bit we've got to change, and we have to change that first before the culture will change. And it's not about, with respect, it's not about government, it's not about DBT, it's not about Post Office determining what the culture is going to be. It's about you sort of being involved in that, and I mean you being involved in that, and actually having an independent sort of way in actually being able to construct that, rather than a case of it being under that control, so that we hear you, but we're not actually going to do anything about it because it's not fitting into what we want. That's the fundamental problem, and that's where we have to change. And if we can change that so that you're recognised in an ownership sort of aspect of the business, then the right culture will flow from that. Because, as I've said often, it's not them and us, it's us. You sell the products that Post Office provide. The more products they can provide, the more you can sell. We are in a business that's actually sort of in decline, managed decline. Back in 2013, 1.024 billion, I think it's about 850 million, sort of there or thereabouts from March this year, there or thereabouts. You know, and that's before you take inflation into account. So it's a business in managed decline. Yes, there is competition sort of coming in. Totally agree, that competition is coming irrespective. We need to be as fit as we possibly can be to be able to face that competition. And when you, as business people, see the business that you're in a relationship with making decisions that results in new post offices opening in close proximity to them, you feel as if you're having the carpet sort of kind of dragged from sort of underneath you, and you don't feel as if you're being listened to. So that's how we change culture. It won't happen, it can't happen if the structure sort of is right, and that's what we need to change. But our culture needs to change too, okay? Let's be clear on that. Our culture needs to change too. And we've got to sort of actually work with the Post Office to make this happen. We can't be sitting back expecting the Post Office to do it all, okay, and then complain about what they're doing. We've got to get involved. We've got to sort of be part of it. We've got to be part of the conversation. And this business needs you to help them sort of be successful sort of going forward, okay?
Right, thanks, Calum. Finally, Jim, have you ever experienced in your line of work any sort of examples where cultural change has led to really positive change?
Yeah, I mean, what we're trying to change within Post Office, it's a huge beast of a machine, and it's been operating for a long, long time. But we've worked with other big industries, so there's a lot of work going on within the health service. And again, it's a complex systems with lots of stakeholders, but it is possible. And I think the simplest way to put it is they listen and they act. Not listen because it looks useful or good. Listen and act on it, which doesn't mean, and I said right at the beginning, it doesn't mean act on everything. Everyone will have a view, everyone will have an opinion, and somebody's got to make sense of that, and how does it apply across a massive network. And Charlotte was very right. Every single person in here will have a very different view. Deval, you mentioned about culture change and not seeing it. Other people will do, other people won't. So some of that is around listening to comments like that, because just because I've told you doesn't mean it's landed. Just because I've shared a document doesn't mean that everyone's read it and read it the same way. So it's that constant listening, feeding back, listening, feeding back. And I think where we've seen it work really, really well is there are uncomfortable conversations where you have to say, I've listened, but actually we can't. but it's being transparent about the why we can't and what the bigger implications of that are. And, you know, I know if something is going to affect me, I'm worried about me. I'm not necessarily worried about everyone else. It's natural, it's what we do. But if no one actually tells me the impact of that, why I can't move forward with this, or why what you've told us won't work in the bigger picture of things, I'm more inclined to be on board and understand that and come back with another solution. I also agree with what Calum said, which is there needs to be a relationship where actually there is an opportunity to influence, but it's everyone's responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
So NFSP are in a position to have those conversations. It's your responsibility to feed that information in and for that relationship to go. And the bottom line for me is around, you know, it is a relationship. At the moment, it's a tricky relationship. It's a very emotionally charged relationship. And that's the part that needs to change, that there is, you're able to be honest about what you need. Post Office is able to be honest about why they can or cannot make that happen, but being very open about that conversation. And that's the beauty of the work that I do in restorative justice, is that we do have some really hard conversations, but they're based on honesty. And you tell what you can tell, and you're honest about what you can't do. And that's where we need to be moving towards.
Right, thank you. Right, can we move on to the final question, and that's from Sue Edgar.
Good morning, conference. Sue Edgar, North East Region. My question has 2 points, and I'm sorry, Tim, but I've got to go back to culture first. You talk about change of culture, yet you still have people employed that sat at the right hand of Paula Venables. We are sub-postmasters and mistresses sat in front of you that you're not listening to. You need to listen to us. And so I want some kind of reassurance, commitment that Horizon scandal will never happen again. And I also want you to reassure us and a commitment again that you will set up a group consisting of Post Office employees and postmasters and mistresses again that will oversee any members that are in problems, having issues in their branches, but they will be there to oversee what Post Office implement. We want to be there at the point of any issues raised. Not for you, we, as you say, to make decisions. We are the ones that should be implementing decisions. Not you. You need to listen to us, and it doesn't seem to be happening.
Right. Thank you, Sue. I think the crux of your question, I mean, a perfect example happened to me this week where a very, very experienced and long-term postmaster, talking about 40 years, phoned me up with what was really a very small problem, but feared that an audit team had turned up the next day. He wasn't in trouble, he didn't do anything wrong, but he was actually phoned me because he was in fear of an audit team turning up and him facing some form of recrimination. I think it's important that postmasters have the confidence to come forward when they hit problems. And look, we all hit problems in our lives, in our businesses, you know, and it's nobody's fault. It's just things that happen. There's got to be some mechanism somewhere, and Federation would do an awful lot. But there's still people out there that's not coming forward when they do get a problem because they fear what the consequences could be. So, Charlotte, you know, is this something that the Post Office could work on?
Yeah, look, thank you, Sue. We are, and this is a we are as committed to making sure a Horizon scandal, anything of that nature never happens again. So look, you have our absolute commitment. And there are lots of ways we can work together on that at all different levels. So let's take that as a follow-up. I mean, there are lots of engagement forms already that will be speaking to that, but if we haven't got it right and we need something additional, let's do it. I'm very conscious, we are all very conscious of that fear that holds people back from sharing concerns, or that fear of recrimination. That is a long scar that will take a while for us collectively to show you that's, you know, that we have a different culture, we have a different way of offering support, that you know, recrimination isn't there in the business. I hope nobody here has experienced it. If you have, tell me straight away.
It's ever so slightly different, Satnam, because what we're talking about here is we're talking about sort of if there's not sort of historical sort of things. Yes, I know, and there is, we've already sort of talking about that, and we need to sort of get that. What we're talking about is if there's actually a discrepancy sort of takes place now, and if I may sort of Charlotte, sort of apologies, but I would say that is an area where I would sort of say there's been fantastic change in culture.
Because you have lots of touch points, you know, that is one of our biggest worries. So please share if you feel genuinely that support has changed, that the culture's changed, that there shouldn't be a fear of recrimination anymore. You know, tell your other postman, because we need that relationship to be more straightforward.
What I would sort of say, and please, if I see Mike sort of here and Mel sort of at the back as well, the way that they've changed, sort of the way that these things are dealt with, absolutely fantastic. They are so open. They're so helpful. The attitude is completely different to what it was sort of before. First of all, they're not called auditors. Okay, that term is gone. And you know, if we need help and support from sort of Mel and her team, it's there. You know, and same with Mike and his team. It's there. Okay, and everything is being designed, everything is being done to sort of make sure that if something does go wrong, the post office is there to help and support. What I would sort of say is no one should suffer in silence any longer. No one should be in a situation where the fear that actually something's gone wrong. Reach out as early as you possibly can. That's what Nilish was talking about on, was it yesterday? Apologies, Nilish. That's what he was talking about yesterday, and we can help you, and we will work with the post office, and the post office will work with us to actually to find out sort of what's gone wrong and try to sort of come to sort of a solution. I do think sort of we need a mediation sort of process sort of as well sort of in there, because there's going to be sort of times sort of where within any relationship, you know, there's going to be sort of a little bit of tension sort of there, and the post office can't act as judge, jury and executioner any longer. So we need to sort of have, again, that level of independence so that your case can be brought, evidence can be brought, and you know, as Jim's sort of talking about, it's about talking, it's about discussing, it's about being heard, it's having those difficult conversations, and that's a fantastic sort of way in which it can be done. It's not going to be needed to be done, hopefully, on too regular a basis, but it needs to be there. And if we can sort of get that process sort of set out, then we don't have to go down sort of any litigation, because we don't want to go back there, do we? We don't want to go to the CPS. You know, it's all done sort of externally sort of on that basis now. So please, on that basis, anybody says they've got a problem, anybody says they've got an issue, tell them to get in touch with us straight away, and I can guarantee you that Mike's team and Mel's team will do everything they possibly can to sort of work with us to help you, okay? That is where I would definitely say the culture has changed.
Right, thank you, Calum. David, you know, given your experience, I mean, if you look at the Horizon scandal, for instance, you know, I think there's lots of ex-postmasters out there that have still not come forward. If you look at the HSS claims, for instance, and the culture might have changed, but, you know, there's 200 postmasters in here, but there's another 7,000 somewhere who will be working merrily away, and they just don't know that the culture's changed in post office, and how can they have the confidence to come forward? So that's one question I've got. You know, how are we going to get around that? How are we going to address that?
Well, it goes back to something that Charlotte very poignantly picked out. Is the scars run deep, and Jim and I spent many long hours speaking with postmasters and postmistresses across the country, and the scars do run deep. And it goes back to Sue's point about how can we make sure this never happens again. The answer to that, Sue, is probably you can't. But what you can do is you can change what happens when something goes wrong. You often hear politicians saying, we're going to do this, this will never happen again. And we all know it is, because you can't run an organization without problems. But when you develop a culture where when a mistake happens, it's owned and addressed and people feel confident. So you get that in your own post office. Mrs. Smith comes in, she gets the wrong change, and she comes back and says, Mr. Khan, I got the wrong change. I said, oh, did you? You're absolutely right, you did get the wrong. My apologies, Mrs. Smith, here's your money. And he goes away from that feeling, you know what, that Mr. Khan, that Mr. Singh, just such an honest man. So, you get that because you know things are going to go. When a customer knows that things are going to be put right if there's a problem, it really enhances the reputation of that business and smooths the way going forward. So similarly with post office, as Charlotte says, the scars run deep, and as Jim will say, I'm sure in a few moments, you can't just say sorry, perhaps pay a little compensation, perhaps very late, as this gentleman is saying over here, and then just move on. Scars take an awful long time to develop, and they take a long time to heal. Jim?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think one of the things, when we were talking to postmasters, that was very, very clear is there's not one thing that is going to make that harm go away. So redress will do a part of that. Restorative justice will do a part. But actually, this is 2.5 decades of harm that isn't going to be resolved by one restorative justice meeting or one check. It's deep harm. It will last a long, long time. I think what is important is rebuilding trust up. There has to be trust that I can come forward, and that's the part now that needs to be focused on is how do we rebuild trust so that if things do go wrong, and as David said, no one can guarantee it won't. None of us have that within our gift, but it's how quickly it's responded to. And how openly and honestly it's responded.
And that's the thing, they're sat now, so obviously 2021, he hasn't got his compensation. Why has he not got his compensation? And that the impact that's continuing to have on him.
Compounded harm.
Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Satnam. Yeah. We've time for one last question from John.
Good morning, conference. John Shepherd, North East region. Right. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions this morning. I really appreciate everything that you guys have said. But I'd like to ask a question of David, really, and take this opportunity. Network transformation and the work that you're doing on our behalf. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to share with this audience today. If you could tell us where we are and where that journey may well take us, because I think we'd all like to hear a little bit more. Thank you.
Right, thank you, John. David?
Well, thank you. This was a federation initiative. Worked very hard to get the minister to engage with the issue of network transformation. And again, it goes back to culture, and it goes back to experience, and it goes back to relationship. Network transformation, again, was a top-down proposal that was imposed rather than bottom-up. And it affected every community in the country because it affected every post office in the country. There were deep concerns expressed by members that the process of the network transformation implementation was not fair, was not right. People felt it railroaded, they felt as if they were coerced into changes of contracts, they felt that they were pushed out of the network unfairly or on unfair terms. Now, this was a huge project. In the end, it cost almost 2 billion, 1.9 billion pounds. Promises were made, including at a National Federation conference by the then minister, who appeared at the conference, I think it was about 2011, and said that the post offices would become the front face for government business. But since that speech in 2011, government business going through post offices has dropped from about 560 million to about 30 million. So the promise that if you work with us on this change, this transformation, and we will deliver additional government business, it didn't happen. People would use the word we were sold a pup. And so, in fairness to the minister, he has set up a national review of the network transformation programme. They've appointed a King's Counsel called Adam Tolley. Adam Tolley is basically the UK's leading employment lawyer. He writes a book called Tolley on Employment Law, and anyone who wants to know about employment law reads Tolley. And so we sat down with Adam Tolley and his team recently to talk about how he proposes to undertake this review of network transformation. And it was a good meeting. We took a lot of comfort from the assurances we were given about his independence and the way he's going to approach this. But the one thing we did say to him, and I'll be very open about this, is that the Post Office must provide the postmasters through the National Federation with the tools to engage with this review, and that is to have equal representation, to be able to put forward postmasters' concerns to the King's Counsel who's conducting this review. And we are having meetings with the Post Office. I think we might be meeting Charlotte in the next week or so about ensuring that there is some funding available for National Federation members to have legal advice and representation so that they can put their case. And we want to put forward postmasters' best case, to explain what happened to us. Adam Tolley has asked us to present him with case studies. It'll take quite a bit of work to get that done, because we will then, he has said, I will follow where the evidence leads me. Now, if at the end of that review process, Adam Tolley says, no, I've had a look at it, it was perfectly implemented, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with it, here's the evidence to support that, well, that's a pill we'll have to swallow. But if he doesn't, then we expect further work to be done, because this was a major £2 billion project that affected the entire country. People were dissatisfied with it. And what we're looking to Post Office and to DBT to ensure is that postmasters are able to participate in that review on equal terms with Post Office and with other stakeholders. So in terms of timescales, Adam Tolley has ambitiously said he'd like to report by the autumn. I would be surprised if he'd be able to do that. I would have thought it would be early next year if we were doing well. But we need, in order for him to do his work, we need to be able to get out of the traps. And getting out of the traps means that the Post Office react reasonably to the National Federation's request for grant funding, so that postmasters can be represented in this process, so that it can be done right, and we get a clear report based on facts that we can judge and determine on its outcome.
Right, thank you, David. We probably could do another hour and a half on network transformation, but unfortunately we can't. We're on a little bit of a tight schedule because of the Minister. So I'd just like to thank all the panellists for a very frank and open and transparent debate on the subject, and so everybody